students, to the online study. We will see the explanation of lesson number 5, Mother's Day. This is a very good chapter, very good lesson. Moreover, this is a very humorous play. It is a drama that will entertain you, that will make you to laugh. Moreover, when you will go through the lesson, you will enjoy the fun. You will be interested in the events of this play. This lesson had a very clear theme. That theme is the status of a mother in the family. The author wants to highlight the importance, significance, and the position of a mother in the family through the medium of a family. This family is the family of Mrs. Annie Pearson, whose husband is Mr. George Pearson, daughter is Doris Pearson, and son is Cyril Pearson. Next to them lived Mrs. Fitzgerald, who is the neighbor of Mrs. Pearson and one of her best friend. The play opens in the living room of Pearson's house, where Mrs. Pearson and Mrs. Fitzgerald are playing cards. Mrs. Fitzgerald is a bold and courageous type of lady. She is also a fortune teller, had magical power. While talking to Mrs. Pearson, she comes to know that her husband and children do not treat her well. She has to take their orders as if she was a servant in the house. Now see here, Mrs. Fitzgerald and Mrs. Pearson, both they were playing cards. Simultaneously, Mrs. Pearson tells the things of her heart to Mrs. Fitzgerald. She says that her family members, including her children, would not treat her well. They treat her just like servant. Moreover, she has to accept the orders given by other family members. She stays at home every night while they go out enjoying themselves. Not only that, she is treated just like a servant, but no one would take her along with them. No members of family would take her outside, as they go to outside to enjoy themselves, but they would not take this Annie Pearson. She would be always in her house. Mrs. Fitzgerald asked Mrs. Pearson to be the boss of the family and not allow herself treated like dirt. Now this is a piece of advice that was given by Mrs. Fitzgerald. She said to Mrs. Pearson that she should behave like a boss, or else she will be treated like a servant. It depends on her how she wants to be treated like, or a boss or a servant. It depends on her. That means she has to exercise her authority, her power or privileges just like a boss. So it depends on her whether she wanted to be a boss or a servant in her own family. This was a piece of advice given by Mrs. Fitzgerald. Mrs. Fitzgerald had spent 12 years in the East. She had learned some magical powers of exchanging personality. This is very unique thing. This is very incredible thing about Mrs. Fitzgerald. She had been to East and acquired proficiency in magic. Now she is able to exchange the personalities This is due to her magical power. She could exchange the personalities. Mrs. Fitzgerald, she wanted to help Mrs. Pearson. She made up a plan to exchange their personalities. That means Mrs. Pearson will become Mrs. Fitzgerald and Mrs. Fitzgerald will become Mrs. Pearson. Not outwardly but inwardly or internally, their personalities will be exchanged by the magical power. But Mrs. Annie Pearson, she did not agree. She hesitated a lot. Finally, Mrs. Pearson agreed to Mrs. Fitzgerald's suggestion. Finally, after a lot of convincing, after being convinced by Mrs. Fitzgerald, she agreed to exchange their personality. Mrs. Fitzgerald muttered some magical words. She spelled some magical words. Soon after that, their personalities were exchanged. The point here, it is that it is not the external appearance that is changed. The external appearance will be the same, but the internal personalities will be exchanged. Now this magic had its effect on both of them. Thus their external appearance remained same, while internal personalities, they were exchanged. Now Mrs. Pearson, actual Mrs. Pearson, had become Mrs. Fitzgerald, and Mrs. Fitzgerald had become Mrs. Pearson. And thus, Mrs. Pearson, who was kind-hearted woman, who had a soft corner for the family members, who was timid or who was very simpleton. But now, due to the exchange of this personality, she had become bold, courageous, brave, and dominating. And after this exchange of personalities, both of them, they had gone to their house. Their appearance have also been changed. So the real Pearson goes to Mrs. Fitzgerald's house, and Mrs. Fitzgerald stays in Mrs. Pearson's house. After this change of personality, the first to come home from office is Doris. Now see, personality is exchanged. Both of them, they have gone to their houses, and this is the first one who comes from the office, and this is none other than her daughter Doris. Doris comes from the office, Mrs. Pearson's daughter. Doris is surprised to see her mother smoking. Now see, when Doris, her daughter, Mrs. Annie Pearson's daughter, she entered the room, she had seen that Mrs. Pearson, her mother, she is smoking. She was surprised, she was shocked to see that her mother is sitting there and smoking. When she asked her mother about it, Mrs. Pearson says that there is no law against smoking. Till now, Doris had never ever seen her mother smoking. So this was surprising. This was something that was shocking to her, and she asked about it. At this, Mrs. Annie Pearson, she says that there is no law against smoking. There is no restriction against smoking. When Doris asked her, they were having tea in the kitchen. Mrs. Pearson says that she may have it where she likes. Now see that. Doris, she comes into the house, she finds her mother smoking. She asked about it, she got the reply that there is no restriction, there is no limitation or law concerning smoking, regarding smoking. And then she asked for the tea. She asked her mother to make tea for her. At this, another bold answer comes from the part of Mrs. Annie Pearson, that if you want to have the tea, go and prepare yourself. Now she was completely shaken. Doris was completely shaken and stunned. She failed to understand her mother's behavior. Now she failed to understand such behavior of her mother, who had been so kind, who had been so loving, who had been so doting and caring. Now she is behaving rudely, arrogantly, stubbornly. She failed to understand how this change happened to her mother, how her behavior is changed completely. Doris then asked her mother if her yellow silk dress has been pressed or ironed, as she has to go out with her boyfriend. Now Doris Pearson asked her mother whether she has ironed her clothes or not. At this point, Mrs. Pearson tell her to do it herself. Mrs. Pearson straightforwardly tell her to do it herself. She also mocked at her boyfriend, Charlie Spence. Previously, whatever the command, whatever the order of children would be, no matter, Mrs. Annie Pearson would do that. She accepted all the orders. She did all the works as per the orders given by her children. When Doris would tell her to iron her clothes, she would do that. Now this time, when she asked that whether the clothes were ironed or not, she said that, do it yourself. Straightforwardly, directly, she refused to do that. After that, she mocked about the boyfriend of Doris. She knew Charlie Spence, who was the boyfriend of her daughter. She made fun of him. She mocked about Charlie Spence. Doris is nearly in tears on hearing that from her mother. And Doris, when she heard that her mother herself was mocking at her boyfriend, she could not bear that thing. She began to weep. She almost cried on hearing this from her mother. She never ever expected such a behavior, such a different behavior from her mother. And now, the next to come was Mrs. Pearson's son, Cyril Pearson. Now see, the first to enter into the house after the personalities were exchanged. First was Doris, second is Cyril Pearson. As soon as he enters the house, he asks the mother if tea is ready and his shirt has been mended. Now see, Doris, when she enters in, she asks whether her clothes were ironed or not. This Cyril, the son of Annie Pearson, as he enters into the house, he asks whether the tea is ready or not and his shirt is mended or not. That means both of the children, they whenever come into the house, they only given orders to their mother. They only wanted their mother to do all the works on behalf of them. They treated her just like a servant. Now this time when he asked whether his shirt is mended or not, Mrs. Pearson answers in a negative way. She tells him bluntly that she does not like the work of mending. Now this is a straightforward, direct answer to Cyril, that she does not like mending. So she hasn't done mending. She did not do the mending work of the shirt. She refused to do. Now this irritated and annoyed Cyril. Mrs. Pearson then points out to Cyril that he doesn't do things for home which he does not want to do. Besides, if he doesn't want to do anything in the office, the employees get the union to bar it. So she has now joined this movement. Now she says something about the corporate, something about the office. When he does not do anything, Cyril does not do anything that he wants to do, even in the office, or the employees then go to the bar, or they make a union and stop that work. So she says that union, people make union, people groups make union in order to go for strike. They, launch strikes in the workplace. So she says that, like the people, they join the strike, she is also joined to that movement. Doris comes again looking pale and red-eyed. Now at this point of time, Doris enters the living room. She is in the process of dressing herself to go out with her boyfriend, but Mrs. Pearson ridiculed her, saying that she looked terrible. See here, first, she did not iron her clothes. Second, she mocked her boyfriend. Third, when she is dressed up and she is ready to go out, she said that she looked terrible. That means she looked ugly. Now this is how a mother behaved to her own daughter. Mrs. Pearson bluntly conveyed her feeling to both Doris and Cyril. Now Mrs. Pearson is bold enough to share her feeling with her children, with Doris and Cyril. She said that henceforth she would work for fixed hours a day like them. Now, if we see any institute, organization, or office, they have a fixed time at which the employees work. Similarly, Mrs. Annie Pearson said that she will work for fixed hours in a day like them. She will also have 2 days off a week. Now the condition of working is that she will work for fixed time, fixed hour in a day. Moreover, she need 2 days off in a week. In a week, there will be 2 holidays for her. She could do only cooking for those 2 days. Now, there is one more condition, that during that time, when she will have the 2 holidays, in that time she will only cook for the members of the family, while all other things will be done by the family members. Meanwhile, on those 2 days, she will be cooking food. The rest of the things will be done by the other family members. Mrs. Pearson's husband, George Pearson, Mr. George Pearson, he enters the house. First, the daughter Doris enters the house. She is greatly annoyed, frustrated by the behavior of Mrs. Annie Pearson, her mother. Second, Cyril Pearson enters into the house. He is also shocked to see the different type of behavior that her mother showed. Now, third person to enter into the house is Mr. George Pearson, the father of Cyril and Doris, the husband of Annie Pearson. George is a decent man. He is amazed to find Mrs. Pearson sipping stout. Now, stout is a kind of drink. And when he saw his wife sipping stout, he was shocked, like Cyril and Doris. He was shocked. He tells his wife that he had never seen her taking stout. He had never seen her taking stout. He was shocked, and he told this to his wife, that I have never seen you taking stout. He says that he doesn't like surprises. Now this is something, that was said by Mr. George Pearson, that he does not like surprises. He tells her that he won't have tea at home because he has to go to a special snooker match at the club. Now, Mr. George Pearson, he says that he cannot take tea at home because he had to go to a special snooker match at the club. He refused to have a tea in the house. At that point, Mrs. Annie Pearson, she says that tea is not prepared by her. This time, she says that you did not like to have a tea in the home, but who made tea for you? There is no tea made for you in the home. This more surprised George Pearson. He was surprised more and angry on the news that no tea had been prepared for him at home by his wife. Even though he did not like to have a tea, but when he discovered that tea is not prepared for him, he gets angry when he doesn't want a tea. Then Mrs. Pearson pinches him the most when she tells her husband that people at the club call him Pompey Pearson. Now she makes the fun of her husband. Previously she made the fun of Doris' boyfriend. Now she's making fun of her own husband. That at the club people used to call George Pearson Pompey Pearson. People used to mock at him or make fun behind him. Therefore, she also mocked at him, saying that people used to comment on you, remark on you like this way behind you, because you are fat. Because you are fat guy. All the three, George, Cyril, Doris, feel surprised at the change that has taken place in Mrs. Pearson. Cyril tells her mother that it is not good on her part to hurt their feeling. Now Cyril, he says that it is not a good thing that she should hurt her own children, hurt the feeling of her children. At this, Mrs. Pearson replies that sometimes it does people good to have their feeling hurt. Sometimes we have to adopt the shock treatment. Shock treatment, that means sometimes we should hurt the feeling of others so that they should understand us, so that they should understand our feelings, our emotions. So Mrs. Pearson is saying that sometimes it is good to hurt people, to have them understand our feelings. The truth should not hurt anybody for long. If his father does not go to club so often, perhaps people there might stop laughing at him. Now she's saying that perhaps Mr. George Pearson would not go to the club and people will stop laughing at him. But he continued to go to the club. That is why people make fun of him and laugh at him. When Cyril doubts it, Mrs. Pearson says that he knows everything. That means Cyril, spends too much time at greyhound races and dirt tracks and ice shows. At this, when she says to her husband that she knew that how the people behave or mock at you in the club, she clarifies this incident from her son Cyril, since he is outside for races, dirt tracks and ice shows, and moreover in the club Cyril goes. So he confirmed that Mr. George Pearson is often given comment and remarks by the people. Mrs. Fitzgerald now comes there. Now at this point of time, when Cyril, George, Doris, three of them, they are discussing the matter with Mrs. Annie Pearson, that they were very much emotionally wounded by this type of behavior of Mrs. Annie Pearson. This time, Mrs. Fitzgerald comes in there. Mrs. Fitzgerald was shocked at the way Mrs. Pearson was treating her husband and children. Now she was displeased. She was shocked that Mrs. Pearson is treating her children and husband in this way. But Mrs. Pearson rebuked her, saying that she may be allowed to manage her family in her own way. When Mrs. Fitzgerald tried to intervene between them, when she wanted to intervene between their conversation, Mrs. Pearson rebuked her. She scolded her and asked her that she may be allowed to manage her family matters according to her ways. George now enters again, sit in the armchair, smoking his pipe. George enters into that living room. Mrs. Pearson rebukes him for being so impolite. Mrs. Pearson, she rebuked her husband for being impolite. He loses his temper at this and calls her Barney. Now at that time, when George Pearson is called in, when George Pearson is rebuked for being impolite in front of Mrs. Fitzgerald, who was their neighbor, he got angry. He lost his temper at once and called his wife Barney. And that time, this Mrs. Pearson, she became so aggressive and she threatened to slap her husband, George Pearson, if he says that again. So this is a very terrible picture of Annie Pearson, who was soft-hearted, who was kind-hearted, generous, who was very emotional. Now she is threatening her own husband to slap him. George Pearson is now afraid. George Pearson seemed to be very afraid. What if Mrs. Pearson would slap him in front of Mrs. Fitzgerald? Mrs. Pearson mockingly asked him to go to the club as people are waiting for him. Now, in a mocking way, she tells her husband to go to the club where people would be waiting for him in order to make fun of him and laugh at his ompy-pompy appearance. She asked Cyril and Doris also to leave her alone for a personal conversation with Mrs. Fitzgerald. Now, Mrs. Pearson, she asked Doris and Cyril to leave her at once, asked her husband to go to the club because she needs to talk to Mrs. Fitzgerald. She wants to have a personal conversation with Mrs. Fitzgerald. When all the three are gone, Mrs. Pearson asked Mrs. Fitzgerald to change back to their original personalities. Mrs. Pearson, she could not take this longer. She hurted the feeling of her children, her husband, even she mocked at them. But she is very emotional. She asked Mrs. Fitzgerald to change the original personalities, as this was done with the chanting of a magical spell. Finally, Mrs. Fitzgerald, she accepted this condition of exchanging the original personalities. Then she spoke some magical words, and the original personalities were exchanged finally. Mrs. Fitzgerald then advises Mrs. Pearson to be a bit strict with her looks and tone. Now this is a piece of advice given by Mrs. Fitzgerald, that now the thing is different. Now your children may understand you. Now you have taught them a lesson, but be strict towards them in your looks and tone. This will show that she can be tough if she wants to be. Now this type of behavior can tell them, can show them that she can be tough if she wanted. But she is not an actually tough or hard-hearted woman. Mrs. Pearson tell Mrs. Fitzgerald that she wants them to stay at home sometimes. She wants Doris and Cyril to get the supper ready while she and her husband might sit down for a game of rummy. Now this is a desire of Mrs. Pearson. She wants her children to stay with her, to hang around her, as she also wanted to play a game of rummy with her husband. This Mrs. Pearson is able to be the real mistress of the house, and her husband and children agree to do whatever she wants them to do. In this way, Mrs. Annie Pearson taught a lesson to her children and husband, who never understood her feeling, who never understood her position as a mother, as a wife. But now, after the shock treatment, after her behavior was changed, after she became tough and strict towards them, they realized that their mother can be tough. She kept her real position as a mistress of the house. Now the children, Doris and Cyril, would do anything that is commanded by the mother. Even her husband would help and assist her. Why? It's because Cyril, Doris and George, three of them understood the value, importance and role of a mother, role of a woman in the family.